welcome back to the Imaginary Gallery. It's TJ, your host. We're going further within the Psychopath's Bag of Tricks, referencing Robert D. Hare, PhD's book, Without Conscience, The Disturbing World of the Psychopaths Among Us. The last video covered crime and violence. This one still falls under the chapter of the roots of the problem. Now we're going into origins, which involves the wonderful debate of nature versus nurture. So Dr. Hare begins this section stating that anyone who hears even about the idea of a child being a psychopath, many of us come to the same question of why? As he covered before, a lot of adolescents will go off track because of a poor social environment, such as parents who are neglecting or abusive, living in poverty, no job opportunities, bad friends or companions. But the psychopath seems off track from the start. So again, he asks, why? Unfortunately, the forces that create a psychopath are still obscure to researchers. However, several rudimentary theories about the causes of psychopathy are worth considering. There's a spectrum, so at one end of this, there are theories that view psychopathy as largely a product of genetic or biological factors, which would be nature. However, theories at the other end of the spectrum state that psychopathy results entirely from a faulty early social environment, which would be nurture. As with most controversies, Hare states that the truth, no doubt, lies somewhere in between, which means that psychopathic attitudes and behaviors very likely are the result of a combination of biological and environmental forces. Nature. He starts off the section by stating that there's evidence of genetic and biological bases for people's behaviors, and that some forms of brain damage can produce psychopath-like symptoms. And the early appearance of these types of behaviors that are psychopathic in children provide frameworks for several biological theories regarding the origins of psychopathy. He discusses the relatively new discipline of sociobiology and how it argues that psychopathy is not really a psychiatric disorder as much as it's an expression of a particular genetically based reproductive strategy. In plain words, sociobiologists assert that one of the main roles in life for us is to reproduce, thereby passing on our genes all to the next generation, which we can do in several different ways. One reproductive strategy is to have only a few kids and to nurture each one carefully, thus ensuring that they have a wonderful chance of survival. Another strategy is to have so many kids that some are bound to survive, even if they're neglected or abandoned. Psychopaths supposedly adhere to an extreme version of the latter strategy. They reproduce as often as possible and waste little energy in worrying about the welfare of the children that they produce. In this way, they propagate their genes with little or no personal investment. For male psychopaths, the most effective way to have lots of children is to mate with and then quickly abandon a large number of ladies. Unless the psychopath is so attractive and charming that ladies actively pursue him, he can at best accomplish his goal by manipulation, deception, cheating, and misrepresenting his status. One of Dr. Hare's psychopathic subjects was a 30-year-old fraud artist. He'd had dozens of common law marriages. The first one occurred when he was 16 years old. He had a peripheral association with several rock stars and many times passed him off as their agent or their personal confidant. He had very little difficulty in convincing aspiring entertainers that he could give their careers a large boost. In 8 cases that Dr. Hare knows about, he moved in with these types of women, and as soon as they became pregnant, he left. When asked about his children, he said,
"What's there to tell? They're kids, that's all."
Sociobiologists don't argue that the sexual behavior of people is consciously directed to passing on the gene pool, only that nature has provided us with various strategies for doing so. One of them just happens to be the cheating strategy, which is used by psychopaths. When asked if he was promiscuous because he wanted to have lots of kids and thus attain a sort of genetic immortality, one of their psychopathic subjects laughed and said, "I just like to..." It starts with an F. The behavior of female psychopaths also reflects a cheating strategy, one in which they have several sexual relations with a lot of men and the welfare of the offspring is ignored. Quote,
"I can always have another,"
a female psychopath coldly replied when Dr. Hare questioned her about an incident in which her 2-year-old daughter was beaten to death by one of the many lovers that she had, and also 2 older children had previously been taken into protective custody. When asked why she'd want to have another kid, giving her obvious lack of concern for the fate of the first few, her response was,
"I love children. My name's James Alephantis."
like most of the female psychopaths that they studied, her expressed affection for children was starkly contradicted by the behavior that she displayed. These female psychopaths often neglect physically or emotionally their children, or they simply abandon them as they move on from one filthy encounter to another. A chilling illustration is provided by Diane Downs, who abused, neglected, and eventually shot her children, all the while having a prolonged series of affairs. She also became a professional surrogate mother, eager to become pregnant for a fee. Of course, people who make a practice of lying and cheating usually get caught. Their effectiveness is then vastly reduced, so they quickly move on to the next partner, the next group, the next neighborhood or city. Their mobile, nomadic lifestyle and the ease with which they adapt into new social environments can be seen as a part of a constant need for fresh breeding grounds. Another point, cheating skills may have adaptive value in some segments of a competitive society, such as ours. So in other words, far from landing at the bottom of the heap, psychopaths might be helped up some success ladders by their distinctive fake personality traits. The sociobiological theory has strong intuitive appeal for some people, but it's difficult to test scientifically. Most of the supportive evidence is anecdotal or circumstantial. Another theory that's been around a while is that for unknown reasons, some psychopaths' brain structures mature at a very slow, abnormal rate. The basis for this theory is twofold. Similarities between EEGs, which are recorded brainwaves, of adult psychopaths and those of normal adolescents, and similarities between some of the psychopath's characteristics, including their egocentricity, their selfishness, impulsivity, and unwillingness to delay gratification, and those children. To some investigators, this suggests that psychopathy reflects little more than a developmental delay. A Harvard psychologist named Robert Kegan has argued that behind Cleckley's mask of sanity lies not insanity, but a young child of 9 or 10. Hare states that these are interesting speculations, but the brainwave characteristics in question are also associated with drowsiness or boredom in regular adults, and could well result from the psychopath's sleepy disinterest in the procedures used to measure them from a delay in brain development. He also doubts that the egocentricity or impulsivity of children and psychopaths are really the same. He is certain, though, that few people have difficulty in distinguishing between the personality, motivations, and behavior of a normal 10-year-old and those of an adult psychopath, even after allowing for difference in age. More important, few parents of a 10-year-old psychopath would confuse him or her with an ordinary 10-year-old. Another model that Dr. Hare finds interesting argues that psychopathy results from early brain damage or dysfunction, especially in the front part of the brain, which plays the major role in high-level mental activities. And this model is based on some apparent behavioral similarities between psychopaths and patients with damage to their frontal lobe. These similarities include poor skills at long-term planning, low tolerance of frustration, shallow affect, irritability, and aggressiveness, socially inappropriate behavior, and impulsive behavior. However, recent research has failed to find any evidence of frontal lobe damage in psychopaths. And these similarities between the psychopath and the frontal lobe patients may be superficial, or at least no more important than the differences. But there are also several investigators that argue persuasively that some sort of frontal lobe dysfunction, not necessarily involving any kind of damage, may underlie the psychopath's impulsivity and frequent failure to inhibit inappropriate behavior. It's well established that the frontal lobes play a crucial role in the regulation of behavior, and it seems reasonable to hypothesize that, for some reason, faulty wiring, early damage, they are relatively ineffective in regulating the behavior of the psychopath. In my own personal experience, one part really stood out in this section about how the psychopaths go from place to place and fit in at different locations, which most of us would have difficulty doing. Like they adapt so easily to a new area. And in fact, I've gathered from the stories I've heard of various creatures I've been involved with, where the conclusion is that they were in one particular area, they did their thing, and eventually word gets out. Of course, they have built-in strategies they use, so if, for example, they move into your town and they start dating your next-door neighbor and pursuing the neighbor behind her, and then pursue you, it'll be common for you to say, "Aren't you seeing my neighbor?" And they come up with their fake stories, such as, "Oh no, we're just friends," or "Oh no, she wants to date me, but I don't like her, I like you," and all kinds of filth that they make up. But it is true, if they do that for quite a while in one small area, they'll move. They'll go to a different state sometimes, which is what I've seen. Of course, the person didn't say that, but after seeing their behavior and watching it in my own city, I think, well, this makes sense. No wonder it moved to that other state, which was far away, because it kind of like used up everybody here, so then it's got to go somewhere fresh. Now, it can wait a few years, and new people filter in and out. Then they might come back to where they were at first, which is what I believe this one did. It's interesting how they use up all their powers and their abilities, because they can keep that lie going for only so long. Like when you question the neighbor, they can say,
"Oh, she wants me."
but then you might go over to the next door neighbors and come across a videotape of the two of them on the couch kissing. And you'll think, well, what's that all about? And if you see that, the person's likely to just say,
"Oh, that was digital manipulation. That was somebody else. It wasn't me."
or some kind of fake trash, and then they'll disappear. But yes, they will try to cover their tracks, and they're effective in many cases, though, because a regular person who tried to pull such a stunt, such as date the next door neighbor, but then claim they didn't, they might be able to once say, "Oh, I don't know her," but then if you look into it further, most people have that little mechanism in their brain that would get them to say something like, "Okay, look, I really need to talk to you. Yes, I have been dating the next door neighbor. I thought I should tell you. I didn't tell you at first because blah, blah, blah. I thought maybe it would upset you, but I realize it's very important to be honest with you, so I'm going to..." You won't hear that kind of stuff from these creatures. They will just insist that the neighbor's lying. If you saw the video, well, it was faked. And then, of course, it might go next door then, beat up the person, smash up their videos or whatever it is they used, or threaten them.
"Don't you tell anyone anything about me."
I look at that and think, wow, that is dysfunctional, sick, and disordered. Because this person is wanting to continue being a fake and defending their fakery. There is no sense of morality to think that, wait a second, maybe I shouldn't be faking out these people. They don't have that in their brain. It's more like they want to do all they can and get all they can, and who cares who gets hurt in the process. And unfortunately, if you're that person, it can be devastating. Show a little more. Show a little less, add a little smoke. Welcome to burlesque. Everything you dream of, but never can possess. Nothing's what it seems. Welcome to burlesque.
I am the Narcopath.
I just wanted to thank you for coming with me tonight, knowing that I might be with child. I'm so sorry. When you asked about that man who walked by and gave me that special look, you asked if I knew him, and I told you I didn't, but then he came back by and said my name, and I hope you forgive me. I didn't want you to know that I knew him, because if you must know, he raped me. He raped me. I didn't want to have to go through this, so I just told you I didn't know him. I hope you understand. You've probably never been raped before, but I just couldn't admit. I hope you forgive